My name is Christina Gerakiteys. I am the founder of UtopiaX and IdeaSparx. It's my absolute pleasure to be on the online prosperity show. And I'm going to be talking about moonshots. I'm going to be talking about being a generalist. I'm going to be talking a lot about success and failure and limiting beliefs. Can't wait to have the conversation.
Welcome. If you ever wondered what it takes to break free from ordinary thinking and tap into moonshot thinking, then buckle up because today's guest is about to light you up and explore what it looks like to face your failures. Now, Christina, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. All the better for talking with you.
Absolutely. Well, the pleasure is all mine. And if you're just checking out the Online Prosperity Show, welcome to today's exciting episode. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and our guest today is none other than Christina Gerakiteys. And if that name rings a bell, obviously you have done some crazy research in your life. But if not, you should know that she has been shaping the way the world thinks about innovation, creativity, and purposeful impact. She's the CEO, founder, keynote speaker, author, facilitator, and a master at something that we all need a little bit more of, which is playfulness in problem solving. Now, there's a lot that we're going to be going through in this video today, but I want you to know that by the end of this episode, you'll have fresh perspectives on leadership, creativity, and how to shift from I don't know if I can to I definitely can. And if you're thinking I need more energy in my life, don't worry. We are going to tell you how to actually connect with Christina for workshops, speaking engagements, or even just to snag a copy of her book that we're going to be talking about. So sit tight, grab your notepad, and prepare to be inspired, because this isn't just yet another interview. I think it's going to be a masterclass in creating your own playbook for life, business, and everything else in between. Now, Christina, I could go on and talk about things that I know nothing about. Tell us a little bit about, your journey, especially the moment you knew that failure was not fatal.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for that amazing introduction. I feel like I've got huge boots to fill now. My journey started as a very young child. I think I was 6 years old when I experienced my first huge failure. I am the daughter of innovators and business people, so I had a really good start in life as far as freedom of imagination, freedom of expression. So that all very much helped. And my parents were very supportive on anything that I had an interest in. One of the things I had an interest in was the piano and music in general, singing, music, anything. It just lit me up incredibly. And I was the fortunate recipient of several scholarships at the Conservatorium of Music in my hometown. And I'll never forget the very first public performance I gave was on, and I write about this in the book actually, but it was on a grand piano, Steinway, sitting on this enormous stage, and I had never played a grand piano before. So upright pianos, for those of you that are familiar, have a key lock on them. I always used to judge, this will tell you how much I'd learned at this stage. They had a key, and I always judged where middle C was according to the key, where the key was situated on the piano. The grand piano, the Steinway, did not have a key. I had no idea what note to start on. I picked any random note. It was not the correct note. I played atonally for probably, 3 minutes, maybe was the longest the piece would have gone for. I knew it was wrong, but I had my fingers playing from memory, so muscle memory kicked in. I would just put my fingers wherever the muscle memory kicked in at. Completely incorrect, completely atonal. Got up, took a bow, looked at my father in the audience and shrugged. And at that point, the whole audience laughed and cheered and clapped because they knew exactly that it was not what it was meant to be. But at that point, in my life, failure was like, okay, it didn't mean anything. It just meant that people had laughed and, yeah, sure, I had played incorrectly, but it wasn't it didn't have that damaging effect that failures as we grow up, and then we're more worried about what failure is to us personally, and we bring the shame that accompanies failure into that perspective. So there were many instances throughout my life after that where failure wasn't just shrugged off as easily as looking at my dad smiling and, going, oh, well, that's what happened. And it actually had a detrimental effect. And I watched what failure was doing to a lot of other people. And at this point, I didn't understand the significance of it, right? It wasn't until as an adult and many years later, many years into my career, when I started working with startups and with entrepreneurs and learning about what they had perceived as failures. And I had the very good fortune of interviewing, speaking with, working with many entrepreneurs. I used to do some advising. I used to do some promotional work for them. And I'm hearing their stories and I'm going, these stories are absolutely fantastic. And there's so many lessons in the stories, and we really need to share them with people. And that's how the book Celebrating Success One Failure at a Time was born. And I think, like, they're all my favorite chapters, but one of the most poignant chapters to me was my book advisor, because I had to, this book was like 7 years in the making, which was a series of success, failure in itself. Like, will I, won't I? What if no one likes it? What if, all the doubt things. In our pre-conversation, we were talking about imposter syndrome. What gives me the right to write a book on success and failure, except all the ones that I'd already had? And I was speaking to my book advisor, and I said, just by the way, because she kept me accountable for writing the book. I thought, if I'm going to do this, I need a book advisor, someone to keep me accountable, someone to keep me on track. And she did. And in one of our conversations, I said, what's your definition of success and failure? Because that's one of the things that I had written in the book. And she said, oh, I don't believe in failure. And I went, what? She said, I don't believe in failure. Jackie Lane, she's absolutely amazing. She's one of the chapters in the book. Anyway, we started talking about her story. And then she came back to me a little bit later and she said, you know what? I have just had the biggest realization that failure has been a part of this journey. And here's my definition. And I said, can I put you in the book? And she said, yes, you can. She said, I've never been the advisor and been put in the book before, but yes, let's do it. And her story is quite remarkable, the turnaround that she had, because what we're trying to do really is redefine what failure is. Because failure is, it's all those cliches. It's a stepping stone to success. It's something that we have to go through. It's a learning activity. It's something that if you don't learn from it, then what's the point, kind of thing. And we used a lot of the lessons in the book, and every single entrepreneur I interviewed had a different lesson from what their failure and success was. And that was really interesting to uncover. And I think so I asked Mark Randolph. I had the absolute good fortune of meeting Mark Randolph, who's the co-founder of Netflix, at an event, at an innovation conference in Boston that we were both at. And we were talking, and I had listened to his keynote, and his keynote, in the keynote, he said, look, I've had 7 businesses. He said 6 of them failed. One of them, Netflix, succeeded. And I cannot to this day tell you why, what the difference was in how we operated or what we did or anything like that. He said there were different elements in each of the different businesses that led to their failure, and and all those lessons helped with the success of Netflix. Anyway, so I asked him to write the foreword to the book because we'd had quite a long conversation. I said, everything that you said during our conversation fits the themes that we're trying to get across in this book. And he graciously agreed to write the foreword for me. But I thought that was interesting. He's this man who co-founded one of the biggest companies in the world who had 6 failures, so it was all about that journey towards success and all the lessons that we learned. And before I take a breath, again, I'll give you one other example. So there was an organization in Australia called Blue Chili, operated in Australia and New Zealand, and they would have what they called, pardon me, the Golden Cock Award every week. And this golden rooster, you were presented with a golden rooster. It would sit on your desk, and it was not a badge of pride in that look, I failed, I stuffed up, it wasn't that kind of thing. here's what I learned. The badge of honor was, here's what I learned. Here's what I can share with my colleagues so that they don't make the same errors. We all learn from each other's major blemishes, if you like, together. So I think there's lots of organizations that it's not a reward for failure, but it's a reward for the lessons from failure. And we are trying to redefine what failure is. We had a prime minister at one point that went, it's okay to fail. We're going to introduce failure, fail fast, fail forward, fail, fail, fail. But, it's okay. Well, you forgiveness in advance kind of thing. And not for anything that we deliberately tried to fail at, of course. That's not part of this picture. And then as soon as something went wrong, someone got the sack. So it was almost like, if we're going to do this properly, we really need to walk the talk around it. So it's putting your money, if you like, where your mouth is, and learning and redefining what it means to fail and celebrating the lessons that come with that.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking us through that journey in and of itself. And I can so see the 6-year-old Christina trying to fumble through the keys and not being able to find the C key. But you've introduced us to your parents, Christina. If we could just maybe go there. And I feel like there is a very good foundation there. You did mention they were innovative and supportive. What sort of roles and jobs were they doing that would have allowed them to be that kind of parent for a young, innovative kid like you at that time?
So we'll start with my grandparents, because my grandfather came to Australia as a young immigrant at the age of 17, not being able to speak English. He came from a small Greek island called Kythera, which is a beautiful island in Greece, but unpopulated. I think there's like maybe 3,000 people that live there at the height of the population, not during summer when a lot of expats go back. Couldn't speak English, and took 6 weeks to come over on a ship, and was tasked with bringing his 7 siblings to Australia. Go and make enough money, bring your 7 siblings over to Australia to have a better life. And let's just first introduce the term moonshot here, because if that wasn't a moonshot for those 2 parents on that island, sending a 17-year-old to a land far away, knowing that they would never see him again, I don't know what is. So he went over, he came to Australia, he worked at any job that he could, ended up owning milk bars. Every Greek that migrated somewhere usually ended up owning a milk bar at some point in time. So he came over, did that, and actually succeeded in making enough money to bring his siblings to Australia. Very generous man, very open-hearted, incredible man. And we say that he invented the choc top. Okay, so I'm not sure what they call them in other countries around the world, but it's where the choc is hard, the chocolate's hardened on top of the ice cream. And they called them chocolate bombs, and they were born through necessity. So in this milk bar that my grandfather owned, my uncle would come home from university, scoop some ice cream, and my grandfather used to make the most beautiful chocolate that he would adorn Easter eggs with. And my uncle would come and do the vanilla thing on the cone and dunk it in the chocolate and then drip it all the way across the floor, at which point my very formidable grandmother would get extremely cross because somebody had to clean it up. That led to my grandfather perfecting the recipe to make to add enough cocoa and perfect the rest of the recipe to freeze the chocolate on contact. Anyway, they took it to the Royal Easter Show, which is a huge event in Australia. It has been for many years, and they sold out in 3 hours. So he didn't patent the idea. He did patent the wire basket that they would sit in on top of milk bar counters. Very successfully IP'd that, put the copyright on that, but unfortunately didn't copyright the recipe for the kofa. So that was something that was innovative. He was always producing things. My uncle was the inventor of the original talking books. So way back when people used to use cassettes, and my sister and I were the test market. We were the trial period of these books. He would read a story onto a cassette, splice the cassette, stick it on the part of the book where the words were. So very precise, and I can imagine how many times it didn't work, so he had to repeat it. And then had this metal gadget. I remember this little metal kind of gadget that had a magnet on it, and you would rub it up and down, and it would read the words on the cassette tape. So they were the first talking books. We were the guinea pigs. We were the test market on that. So that was quite some years ago. My family were always into moonshots, and they weren't necessarily into the follow-up. So things like copyright, like IP, like marketing, very rarely happened. My uncle would just go from one invention to another. My father had the same entrepreneurial spirit and the same business spirit. My parents were always in business, and they put us to work quite early. Like, I think I was 12 years old when I had my first guided job. I was never on my own, but I was working in the reception at a place that my parents owned, and I was learning how to do that. So I had this incredible thirst for learning, but they also allowed me the ability to explore every interest I had. So I had piano lessons, singing lessons. I went to Greek school. I didn't choose that. They chose that for me. But, I'm really glad that I did, because now I can say a few Greek words and make myself understood when I'm fortunate enough to go back to Greece. But, drama classes and anything, sport, anything that we showed an interest in, they encouraged us to develop. And I think that is something that, a lot of people nowadays, it's very expensive to do that, and B, the time factors around that. So my parents were very careful around one of them always picking us up from school, taking us to activities. My dad would always come home for dinner. So he either worked from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, or he would work from 9 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the morning, kind of thing. So whatever business he was in, whatever hours he was doing, he was always home for dinner. And we always had Sunday lunch. So Sunday lunch was something really special, so that we formulated that closeness, that relationship. And that was a really good role modeling as well, I think. So my parents allowed us opportunities, showered us in love. Doesn't mean that we always accepted it. We had the typical teenage arguments and all that kind of thing with it, but tried to give us the best and most open life that they possibly could, always filled with love. I'm so blessed that I had that childhood, and that's something that we've tried to now input into our children as well. Like, the world's your oyster. What you really need to find is where you belong in that. So what is that purpose in that?
Absolutely. And obviously this now really paints a picture, because, for somebody who would be watching this, they would be thinking my parents would not have been that supportive, or even, that ambitious, in order for them to know what they could possibly push their kids, or to actually help them achieve. But another question that also stems from, your upbringing, was there either spoken or unspoken an expectation for you to actually achieve something? Because I can only imagine at 6, you not being able to press that key would have been so heavy on a 6-year-old than it would have been had the situation been different.
The answer is, my parents just encouraged us to be the best that we could. Having said that, I was pretty much a high achiever, so I wanted to do well. I had this thirst for learning. I read books. Part of the imagination, part of that whole moonshot capacity for me, I was reading almost a book a day. Like, I would, and this was probably from the age of around 10, right? I would have a book under my bed covers with a torch, because we had a certain bedtime, because you had a bedtime and you had to turn the lights off and go to sleep. And I would get the bed and the torch out, and I'd be reading murder mysteries like Nancy Drew and Alfred Hitchcock and anything by Enid Blyton, and I would just continuously borrow books. And I think that was part of that whole imagination, getting into the whole moonshot. Like, what does it mean to think beyond the reality in which you are? So I almost can't remember your original question. There were expectations. My father desperately wanted me to do law when I left school, and I started following a law path, and then just couldn't do it. For multiple reasons, couldn't pursue it, and then ended up pursuing music, drama, which led me into television production, which led me into teaching entrepreneurship at university, writing entrepreneurial courses, things like that. So, and the reason that that came about was because, so I'll tell you a story, and this might also answer there's so many interest things. In one of those positions, I was looking to employ some people to come into the faculty to teach creative industries. And I had a gentleman by the name of, what's his name? Julian. So Jeff Julian. And Jeff came and he said, hey, I would love to work in this department. Anyway, I've looked up Jeff's CV. He's worked for Spielberg. He's worked for Steve Jobs. He's designed for Nokia. He's designed a Porsche. He's done all this remarkable work. And I'm going, and you're here asking me for a job in this faculty? And it turns out there were personal reasons why they were in the area that they were and why he required a job. And I said, look, why did Steve Jobs hire you? And he looked at me and he said, oh, I asked Steve that over coffee. And I'm going, great, you got the best CV in the whole entire world and you've had coffee with Steve Jobs. And he said, Steve said to me that he said he employed him because he knew a lot about a lot of things, but he wasn't a micro specialist in anything. He said, I employed you because you're a generalist. And at that point, I felt the weight of the world come off my shoulder because I was always, next thing I do, I'm just going to go into it 100% and I'm going to stay focused and I'm going to, but I would do one thing and then something else would take my eye and something else. And what happens with generalists is that you're not a generalist in every field. Like there's so many things I know nothing about, but you're a generalist in all these areas that really appeal to you. And what you can then do is join the dots. And that was one of Steve Jobs' big things, join the dots. So how do you look at things from a helicopter view? And I'm on a mission to get every single board around the world to have a helicopter visionary. So they've all got accountants and marketers and bookkeepers and everything else. I want every single board to have a helicopter visionary that has a high level view and can join dots and go, this is where I think this organization should be taken. So there's a whole lot of things in that, and I'm not sure that I answered your question specifically, but it's all these lessons and all these situations that you need to put yourself in order to learn. And that's what creates the big picture about where you're going and what you do and where your passion is.
Absolutely, I quite like that, and a bit of a nod to Steve Jobs himself. He says you cannot connect the dots looking forwards; you can always connect the dots looking backwards. And I like the concept that you've brought about. The generalist, being a generalist. So many people are still very specialized in a world that no longer exists. All right. Back in the time, you would be in a factory and your position is exactly what you're supposed to be producing. But now that the world has become a global village, everything has been open. We're not operating in silos and things of that nature. If you can know a thing about certain things, I think that's the way to go. Now, you didn't know that being a generalist was actually an advantage for you. You thought it was a disadvantage, right?
Yeah, for sure. I actually didn't know what a generalist was. I just thought I was totally scattered and unfocused. Even though and that doesn't mean that I wasn't good at what I did, because I wanted to be perfect at everything I did. And there's another story there in perfection, which I share during workshops and things like that as well. So I came home from school one day. And my dad, who was proud as punch, because I was very nerdy at school. I studied a lot. I had this insatiable desire to learn everything that I could. And I still have. My bookcase looks a bit like yours. Anyway, so I came home from school and I was 13 or 14, and I said, Dad, I came first in the maths test. I got 98%. And Dad said, without one intention of harming me or putting me down, ha ha ha, what happened to the other 2%?
Ooh.
And I didn't hear the pride and the everything else that came with him, the attitude, how proud he was that I came first, right? All I heard was what happened to the other 2%. And at that point, I went into perfectionist mode because I was leaning that way anyway. Like everything had to be good. If I didn't know everything, then I didn't know enough for a test and things like that. But that kind of flipped me into total perfectionism. And I also have this saying that says perfection equals procrastination. So the reason that it took me 7 years to write, celebrate, or to launch, not to write, took me no time at all to write it, but to launch Celebrating Success One Failure at a Time was the perfection. I need an update. I need this. I need that. I need to tell people this story now. And so that level of perfection before it went out to publication meant that the book was delayed like 7 years. It should have been out 7 years earlier. And that similar trait happened with a lot of, a couple of other businesses. I've got one of my companies now, one of my startups is called IdeaSparx. And it's all about entrepreneurship, gathering ideas from entrepreneurs, same kind of thing. It's been 7 years in the making. It's kind of like that 7-inch thing, but it's been 7 years in the making, and we've finally we've got it out in some businesses now, and it's all about encouraging entrepreneurship in large organizations, and how some of the best ideas come from employees in large organizations, and how do you make that really easily accessible? And I'm not talking about the project management tools that collect ideas but then send them into project management. I'm talking about entrepreneurial ideas like the Post-its at 3M, like hot Cheetos, flaming hot Cheetos, ideas like that have actually made companies a lot of money. But also the other side of that with entrepreneurship in organizations is that it's really good on, first of all, for organizational growth, but it's also good for employee retention and employee engagement and employee loyalty, because you look to your employees. I really love that Branson saying that says, happy employees make a happy customer, make a happy shareholder. Like, really? Whoever thought it wouldn't be that way? Except a lot of the times there's the pressure for the shareholder, for the shareholder, for the shareholder. And I think that's I love Branson's thinking on that. If you've got happy people working for you, they're going to produce results. They're going to be productive. They're going to hang around. They're going to want to be there. They're going to want to stay with you. And I think that's super important.
I like that example for the 3M, because it was one of the employees that did that, right? And I wish Kodak actually went on with that, because one of their employees actually came and presented a digital camera to the seniors, and then they say, no, this is not going to work, and look at what happened. And you did give us an example of Netflix, who just looked at what Blockbuster was doing at that particular time, and then they ran with it, and it's just so much innovation is stifled because employees are not given that platform. But you did also introduce us to your book, and there's a concept in your book which I gravitated towards so much. It's the importance of chaos and surrender. But I don't know how that sort of works, because you were talking and alluding to it took you 7 years because you wanted it to be perfect, but there's also that concept of chaos and surrender in there. Now, can you maybe unpack this for us, and how does this how
Yeah. So what I find is that as I'm thinking about something or reading about something or writing about something, it turns into reality. Okay. So chaos and surrender. I was actually reading The Surrender Experiment, which is a great book by Michael Singer, if anybody wants to read it. So Surrender Experiment. And I'm organizing this event, and I tell the whole story in the book. So I'll keep it relatively brief. But every time something was set in stone in this event, it wasn't a huge event. It was like an innovation breakfast. We used to run an innovation breakfast once a year, and I would invite people who had won innovation awards to come and speak and share their knowledge, and so that other people in the audience could pick up ideas, and or organizations could maybe implement them or connect with the guests that we had. So we would gather them from all over Australia. I would have 4 or 5 guests. They would come and talk about the award that they won and why they had won it. Anyway, so I'm organizing this event and I'm reading The Surrender Experiment. And as soon as something was set in stone, something would change. So it used to be called the BIW Most Innovative Companies Breakfast, because BIW, major publication, would run the innovation event. I get a phone call. Christina, you can't call it that anymore because we're not doing it anymore. We're going to change what we're doing. Right. Okay. So I can't call it that. I have to go back to all my sponsors and go, I can't call it BIW anymore. I now need to call it something different. Are you okay to still sponsor? Yeah. We trust you. Yeah. That's fine. And then like one by one, the guests would lock in and then something else would happen, and a guest would lock in and something else would happen. And eventually I get the whole guest thing happening. And then one of the people in my book, Jen Holland, she's won silver awards for innovation in New York City. That's another story on success and failure. But she's won these silver awards. She's got this most amazing company called Throat Scope, who have a remarkable innovation story trend. She's just got the most remarkable brain, and goes forward with so many different ideas. Anyway, it's like less than 48 hours. So it's one night plus it's probably 36 hours before the event. My phone's ringing. I'm consulting with a client, like doing a mentor program with a client. Notice Jen's calling. I'm going, oh, Jen must just want to know what time to come in, like wants to know about the PowerPoint, something like that. Anyway, I ring her back. She said, I've been offered to be on a morning TV show, and I'm doing her PR at this time, right? I've been offered to be on a morning show, and the only time is the exact same time as the breakfast, two separate cities. Couldn't do both at once. And I've gone, oh boy, as someone who's working with you, I'm just going to go, you have to go with the TV. You've got to go with the TV show. And then I'm going, but I've got all these people coming to this breakfast who are expecting to see Jen. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to fill the gap? I'm on the phone immediately. I need a third group of innovators, startups, winners, etc. I end up getting the most remarkable group from the university, who had developed through open source the same machine that cost $1 million. So they had developed it for something like $75,000 through open source. That would help organizations. Okay, I won't go into the whole thing about what it was. So they had agreed. They went, yeah, sure, we'll do it. We're in town. We'll do it. So I had filled that gap. Anyway, so the next night, it's about 11 o'clock before the event, and we're there at 5 o'clock in the morning setting up. It's a breakfast event, everything else. I ring my AV guy. I go, Pete, what do you think the chances are of crossing to Jen at the exact moment when she's on the show? And then we've actually included, and he said, do you realize it's 11 o'clock at night and I'm going to see you in 6 hours? Can we talk about it in the morning? I'm going, yeah, sure. I didn't expect you to answer the phone. Anyway, as it turned out, so all this chaos is happening, right? This one thing's falling over, something else, like so many things fell over in the organization of this event. It was the best event that, like, nobody knew what had gone on. It was the most informative, well-received event, and we crossed to Jen live like within seconds of her being on. So everything came together. It was amazing and beautiful, but that's what I mean by chaos surrender. So because I'm reading the surrender experiment, every time something went wrong, I'm going, okay, I surrender, I surrender, I surrender, I surrender. And that came together beautifully in this event. So there's an element of trust in that. There's also an element of create the opportunity and create the work and make sure it all comes together. But there was this huge element that everything would work out, and it did. It was great.
What a great story. I mean, obviously, I can only imagine you have to, satisfy the people. Jen is in another city, but you actually made it work. So half of the things that we think are within our control are literally not. We just need to let be and let it be, and it will hopefully come together and things of that nature. But with the way that we've been taught, you know what I mean, the way that we've been sort of conditioned. We have one shot at an exam, in school. We've got one shot at doing a certain thing. Like, so many things are an absolute. What's your sort of comment on that? Because so many people are afraid to even engage because they feel like if they miss on a chance, then they cannot actually surrender. It's their whole life depending on that.
And I would argue strongly that their whole life doesn't depend on one decision. And I can say that connecting my dots looking back, and many successful business people, many successful entrepreneurs can connect those dots looking back. But when you're in the thick of it, unless you have the encouragement around you, like I did, like I've been so blessed to also have the most amazing colleagues. I'm part of Singularity University, my colleagues in that arena are so much more learned than I am, so supportive, so collaborative. You ring up and you say, hey, I need a bit of help with this. And they go, yeah, sure. What do you need? So it's the people that you do surround yourself with as well. I don't know about only having five wonderful, highly achieving people in your zone, because sometimes you learn amazing things from people that aren't that purposeful, and it almost teaches you the opposite lesson. So if you see how, and I'm not saying people have purposeless lives, I'm saying that people may not have realized the full intent of their purpose. But if you're looking at somebody that's ambling along and not reaching their potential, and you're seeing that, for me, that actually spurs me on further. So they wouldn't be one of the five high achievers that you have in your circle, according to a lot of the books and everything else. But I think there's a bit of a balance required there, because people from all walks of life teach you lessons, right? All walks of life. People who have different ideologies to you, they teach you things as well. And they teach you to be more open-minded as well, and to listen, like to not get that wall of defense to go, no, this is not in my zone of thinking. But okay, if I'm listening to this egoless, what am I hearing? What are the lessons in this for me? Is there something in this? Why does this person who I really care about, why do they think so strongly about this? There must be something in that. So I think there's something very much purposeful in having people like that in your life as well. But the whole intent around success, failure, allowing limiting beliefs to block you, is actually recognizing them as a limiting belief. And that also is a bit of a journey, for want of a better word. But understanding, so my limiting belief about perfection, I mean, I didn't just wake up one day and go, hey, I remember what Dad said one day. It was a continuous journey. Okay. And so I've been very blessed to go to, and this is why I think personal development, continuous learning are crucial, for your soul, but also for any business transactions and the people that you want to have a positive effect on. All these things are important. And I've been super blessed to have 3 transformative experiences in my life, where I backed myself. And well, the first one, I didn't back myself. The first one, I actually had a back out plan. I was 19. I was invited into a Rotary Youth Leadership Award. And I was playing in bands and doing drama at school. I'd left law by this stage. And, I was too cool for school, basically. And I went, I'm not going to a Rotary thing. Like, why would I go to that? Anyway, I had an escape plan. I was going to be sick, very sick on the second day, and have my car there and leave. It was one of the most transformative experiences I've had, to the point where, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, Prosper, but I looked in the mirror and I didn't recognize myself. I went, oh, someone else is in the bathroom with me. And then I went, oh my God, that's me. So it was that transformative. And then years later, when I went to a Singularity event at Silicon Valley. So we brought Singularity into Australia, and the only way I was allowed to do that was if I had actually attended an event. So I invested quite heavily to go to the program. And I walked in and I went, oh my God, I feel at home. This is my tribe. These are people who think the same way I do. I'm not crazy. This is my normal. This is my tribe, right? And so that was the second one. And the third one was something that is a global organization. It's called the Hoffman process, not to be confused with ice bath Hoff, not to be confused with that at all. Ice baths and I are still, great separation. I may do it one day, but not tomorrow. And it was all about discovering, and that's where I discovered the whole perfection syndrome. Was what was it that was said to you? And so I class those as limiting beliefs. And how do those limiting beliefs hold you back? And if you do the work on yourself, I promise you there are so many breakthroughs to happen in that regard. And whether you do that one-on-one with a coach, whether you do that in the organization that you're with, a lot of the organizations now are getting us to go in and work with their executive teams at that level. So what is that, and how do you unpack, for want of a better word as well? I don't really like the word unpack, but what does that look like for you at a personal level, so that you then are more free to achieve that moonshot that you have for yourself, or that moonshot that you have for your organization? And I think that investment in self is really important, and if you can afford to go somewhere and do it, as a collective, then that is really helpful because you've got this community that's going through exactly the same thing as you. And if you can't do that, there's so much on YouTube. There are so many books, there are so many Kindles, audiobooks, etc., where you can gain so much. And one of my favorite books was written in 1937 by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. It is not what it sounds like. It is such a powerful book around practice, manifesting, around belief, around having the right mentor group, like put your own mentor group together, things like that. There's a series of lessons in that book that are invaluable today, even though it was written in 1937.
Absolutely. I mean, I quite like that journey you've taken us on, especially when it comes to personal development. So many people look to the external to get answers of things that are already within themselves. And usually, when you look to the external, there's, especially here in Australia, Christina, you would appreciate it. There's a whole tall poppy syndrome, and it just really thwarts your growth depending on the people that you've got around yourself there. Now, you've had a shift. Like you said, you saw yourself in the mirror and you couldn't recognize yourself. I mean, there's success and then there's significance, all right, in everything that we're doing. How has your definition of success changed over the years, and what are you chasing now?
I am trying to be the best person I can be and help as many people as I can, whatever in whatever way, shape, or form that is. So I have a very strong ritual every morning. I journal. If you haven't heard of morning pages, please look it up. I thought it was going to be impossible to write 3 full pages of streaming every morning. It has been such a blessing, such a writing down of the things that I don't even realize that are worrying me. Okay, so or formulas for success around or how to solve some of the things around what's worrying me. So I do that. I do a 20-minute guided meditation, followed by a little bit more journaling around what that meditation was. I go for a walk. I have a series of affirmative practices that I do while I'm walking or music that I listen to, and it sets me up beautifully for the day. So my whole thing is to help as many people as I can. And it's so true that you can only help as many people as you can when you are helping yourself as much as you can. And it doesn't mean that you reach perfection before you start helping other people, but it means that, see, I believe in education through storytelling. So our education system is a whole other thing that needs fixing. That would take a whole other podcast to actually go through. And I've been in the education system, and
I don't think we've got
just
enough tape for.
no, no. And I tell you, we wrote, myself and 2 other colleagues wrote the very first creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation course. And we were knocked back because we had the word creativity in it, because creativity, quote, is ceramics and fine arts, even though I'd just come back from Boston University and the word creativity was over engineering and over medicine and like over every single field. And they wouldn't buy it, and stubbornly I wouldn't take it out of the title. So it kind of just disintegrated a little bit and then came back in various forms in later iterations. But so that's that limited, there's a really good example of limited thinking, because you know what, we made up every single rule that exists, so we can unmake and make new rules. And I did a keynote yesterday, and one of the things that I mentioned in the keynote was we use terms like return on investment, and we use terms like KPIs. Return on investment as a term has been around since 1914. Anyone can Google it. Anyone can look it up. I'm not making it up. 1914, return on investment. And in 2024, we're still using that as a measure. KPIs, 1990s, Peter Drucker. 1990s, that's still 30, 40 years ago, or 30 years ago. My maths isn't that great anymore. 30 years ago, we're still using the same measures. And now, instead of measuring economics and all the other things that we measure in those KPIs, or making those the targets, how many new projects, how many things have you sold, how much money have we made? We're actually starting to talk about how much happiness has been created, how much impact have we had, how many people have we helped. But it's a slow climb to equal the economic bits. One of the things that really irks me is where you go, X company, or you hear X company only made $50 billion profit. They were down 20% on their estimate, and the share market goes dives. And you go, you only made $50 billion profit. Like, still celebrate. Just because it's not what you expected, or like it sounds ludicrous when you actually point it out to people. But a whole share market system can dive based on those numbers. And often those numbers are made up. Like they're kind of made up with a bit of a formula, but they don't take into account the things that happen on the day to day and the new crises that's happening around the world, or how different people are affected by different things. So I think it's time, I'd really love everybody to have a look at the Harvard Adult Development Study. It was over 80 years. It's brilliant. You can Google it, look it up. But the number one thing that came out from what makes people happy is the quality of their relationships, which we've known since tribal days. Like, we've known since Indigenous history that those relationships are crucial. How we get on with people is crucial. How people make us feel is important. And yet we had to have the Harvard Adult Study to go, what's the quality of your relationships? That's one of the most important things in your happiness factor. Shouldn't we be measuring that at work? How happy are you at work? How are your colleagues going at work? How are things like this affecting you in your workplace and in your home? Because everything trickles back. Like, you have a really bad day at work, 9 times out of 10, you're going to come home and go, like, everything's going to annoy you. So, I think it's really important that we be true to ourselves. I also believe that, we share 99.9% DNA. We have that 0.1% difference, and that 0.1% is the reason we're on this planet, is the reason that we're here to make a difference to other people. And I think if we can focus in on that 0.1% and use that as the gift that we're bringing to our workplaces, to our families, wherever we go, I think that is a blessing.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for taking us through that. I didn't know that return of investment was a 1914 invention. And you know what else was invented in 1914, Christina?
No,
World
what?
War One. So you
Oh,
can only imagine, if we're using methodologies and words that
yeah.
then sparked a whole world to get into turmoil. You can only imagine what that looks like for everything else. I stand to be corrected on the dates, but those are the
No,
kind of
that's,
timelines of
yeah,
where
it's
those
pretty good.
words would have emanated. So what were they getting a return on, what investment at that particular time, and are we still geared for that kind of world? So you can only imagine. But I digress. You've built Utopia and IdeaSparx, and we still hadn't jumped into your legacy here. These are not just cool names. I mean, UtopiaX and IdeaSparx. It kind of sounds like Elon Musk type.
I had X before Elon Musk did. I had it before he did. I promise you. So UtopiaX, I was really actually like, and like, I sit on the fence with Musk. I know really good things that he's done, and I go, oh my God, did you really say that, kind of thing? So I'm not going to discuss Musk right now. But I had X before Musk.
All
So
right.
2017, I named
Yes.
UtopiaX, and the reason it was called UtopiaX is because everybody's vision of utopia is different. We don't have the same vision of what utopia is for each of us. And I went, okay, well, that's the X factor, And it was influenced. If it was influenced by anything, it was by the 10X discussions that we would have at Singularity. So, if you want a successful business, why are you only 1Xing or 2Xing it? 10X it, like, aim high. And this is the whole idea about moonshots. So even before I got into Singularity, I would go in and run workshops for executives, and we would call them Fat Chance or Pie in the Sky. And it was all about aim as high as you can. It's so easy to come back down, to go, okay, well, that's not going to work. What's the next level down from that? Maybe we can achieve that. Or maybe we can achieve the one just below that. And to have actually that whole vision of aiming as high as you can, we were doing that before COVID, before Singularity, before all these things, because if you don't open your imagination up, I mean, have a think about sci-fi and how many things in sci-fi are now true. And I'm not just going to go back to the future, but, let's go Jetsons. So Jetsons is definitely before your time, and before my time as well. But the Jetsons had the jetpacks and the flying taxis, and hello, look at what we've got now. Richard Browning flies around in a jetpack. I was at a Singularity event, and in flew Richard Browning with his jetpack on. Sounded like 20 vacuum cleaners, stunk of gasoline, but in he comes with his jetpack, which first responders are now using to lower the risk to people of hurting themselves when they're plucking someone off a cliff or grabbing someone out of the water, or they just allow much better access. So, and we've got flying taxis being tested in Japan, I think it is right now. So, and they're autonomous. So you get in, you hit a button, the taxi closes the door and it takes off and takes you to the landing pad that you've programmed in. So all these things are happening, and they all had, this, I don't know, basis maybe in science fiction. Star Trek, just go through it. There's so many things, 3D food, beam me up Scotties, the, printing food on demand, and the printing the medicines, and the Qualcomm is another story. So if you got back from outer space, Dr. Spock would scan you with this Qualcomm thing. Yeah, exactly. And pick up whether you picked up a virus,
Yes.
on your space travels. There's now that they were developing through a wonderful program that Peter Diamandis started called the X Prize, and they've developed this Qualcomm-like thing that can diagnose you for 13, I think it's 13 ailments better than specialists can, with a higher accuracy rate than specialists. And it's a device that they kind of wave over you and they pump in all this additional information, and it diagnoses you better. So all these things that started in science fiction, we're using into science fact, and it's up to us as humans whether we use them in positive ways or whether they become detrimental to our society.
Absolutely. Now, as you brought me, back, I mean, I did watch a bit of the Jetsons, but I wouldn't quite remember it all. But yeah, it was all sci-fi. Half of the things that I wanted as a kid, a phone that, a watch you could speak into and actually communicate with people. This is stuff that is no longer science fiction. What else? Even just the measly remote control. I used to be my parents' remote control, but now my kids can't do anything with that. Some of the screens we have, motion, moved and things like that. So it's one of those. But obviously, for the person that's watching here right now, a lot of us maybe feel stuck, maybe still feel like being a generalist is not the way to go based on the world that we have been brought up in. They're probably stuck in self-doubt. They're walking into rooms and still feel that imposter syndrome because the people that are in there don't dress like them, look like them, or speak like them, and they sort of fear, or maybe still stuck in perfectionism. What's the one action that they can take today to really break through and just move forward in their journey? Because that's pretty much a lot of people today.
So the world is talking about authenticity, honesty, truth. We haven't got there yet. We're, quite a long way away from it in many fields. It's okay not to be a generalist. The world actually needs the generalist, and it needs the person that's specific in knowing how to get things done. And they often make the best co-founders, the best co-executives. Like on your executive team, your CEO should be the visionary. Everyone else, or nearly everyone else on that team, should be the person that knows how to do the books or do the AI and the robotics, and do so that we need those areas of specificity. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that everybody is a journalist, because then we get nowhere, right? Because we need the doers. We need people to actually do things. So, but start stepping into who we really are, learning from the mistakes that we make as we go along, and not being ashamed to own up to anything, and asking for help when we need to. So I think these things they're on a slow roll, and they're becoming more and more talked about. And I wouldn't wish COVID on anybody, but there are a lot of things around, for example, mental health that have come out since COVID, and workplace behavior. I read this morning, Japan's just going to a 4-day working week with all their employees. And all I can say is all those organizations that are going, oh no, everyone's got to come back into the office 5 days a week. Please learn from your colleagues around the world that are not doing that. And there's certain jobs where you have to be in there, and there's certain, there's also the learning experiences. So a bit of the work that we did with some executives in an organization was, we were talking to the young graduates that had come through, and what the young graduates said about the organization, particularly after lockdown, was we don't get to see anyone, we don't get any feedback, we don't know how we're going. There's so many things, so many unanswered questions. And when we took that back to the board and said, here's what your people are saying, because at that level, the executives were going, oh no, I only need to come in 2 days a week. And we went, yeah, but here's what your people are saying. And they went, hadn't even thought of that. We are now going to come back an additional day a week, and it's specifically for mentoring, talking to young graduates, having a discussion, sitting in the coffee room. So there's things like that there's no one answer fits everybody, but don't make people go back into the office 5 days a week just because you're worried about the real estate and just because you're worried about what it might look like, what the optics are on that. Everything needs to be purpose driven. So be your true self, be purpose driven. But don't do things that you don't believe in. And that the saying that says everything that you walk past is something that you condone. If you see bad behavior, call it out, because it's the only way that we're going to create better humans. And it's the only way that we're going to teach people coming up the right way to do things.
Absolutely, and I quite like that. And if people are watching this, where would they go to maybe see some of the work that you're doing? Yeah, be supportive of, maybe show up at a keynote or buy a book off of you or things of that nature.
Connect with me on LinkedIn is a really good place to start. My website is christinagerakiteys.global, and there's connections there. Sign up for a newsletter, get involved in programs. If you want to have a chat, we can set something up through LinkedIn. We're contactable. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn are my two most active platforms, but always available through the website as well.
Absolutely. I'll definitely make sure those links are in the show notes below, Christina, so that people can start that journey. Now, you've introduced us to Christina at 6, Christina at 19, when, you looked at yourself in the mirror and you just did not recognize the person that you were becoming. Obviously, such transformation, I would wish it on anyone who literally, would want to grow and do and have a happier existence. But let's just say you would have walked into that bathroom and we're having a conversation with that 19-year-old self, and she's obviously very confused about what's actually happening. What would you tell her about the journey ahead?
It's okay. I think everyone's journey is okay. I totally respect and recognize that everybody doesn't have an equal start. And like my parents nearly went broke a couple of times. That we didn't have a rich life. We had a rich life. We were supported. So we were supported. We were dearly loved. And there's some questionable people in my extended family, but they've all been lessons that we've learned. So I think the biggest thing we can do is, one of my biggest pet hates is when people go, "I'll just get over it," because you don't get over anything. Like, it happened to you, it happened for whatever reason it happened, and I'm not saying they're all good reasons, but the way to make the most of what it is to learn something from it. How did it make me feel? How did it make me act? Can I practice kindness, forgiveness? What's the level of gratitude that I can have, not for the person that might have hurt me, but for the lessons that I've learnt from it? And there've been some horrific things. Like I've heard absolute horrific things from people that have confided in me, whether as mentor or advisor or whatever it is. So I'm not saying that you just, that you can shove it in a corner but what I am saying is we have to assimilate everything that happens in our lives. So I lost my two grandmothers and my mother within 3 days of each other. And that was a big slap in the face. And you never get over that. Like, my grandmothers died within half an hour of each other, right? So that was like, whoa, that was crazy. We were such a matriarchal family, and they both went. We knew one was sick. We were with one while she was dying. The other one, we get a phone call. We found her, she's gone. She in her chair, upright in a chair. She was 96. And then 3 days later, we went down to bury them when we found my mother dead. So it's not like I've had a clean life. There've been some quite tragic moments in that. But instead of going into depression, instead of going into solid grief, which I think we all need to allow ourselves to do anyway, I went, okay, what am I meant to learn from this? How am I meant to come out of this stronger? And that's just me. That's not everybody. Everybody doesn't face things that same way. But I think what we need to do is assimilate what has happened to us, and where we feel safe, talk about it, because there is a sense of relief in talking about things in trusted spaces, uh, and then progressing forward. Because there's a saying I read. It was a bit of graffiti, and I actually pass it nearly every day when I'm walking, and it says, "Don't be defined by your history. Don't let what happened to you shape who you are. That's your history. It was yesterday. Today, take steps forward." And I think that's a really good. Don't let it define you. If it hurt you, if it culled you, don't let it define you. I went through a bullying circumstance, and like it was absolutely crazy. But I would see this person's name come up on my work phone, and I would literally start shaking. Like I would literally, and I'm going, this is crazy. This is ridiculous. And I envisaged her hurting my family and doing, like, that's how intense it had become. And gradually I got help for that. And I was going, okay, what am I meant to be learning from this? How do I assimilate this into my life? So I did follow my own advice. It doesn't take 2 days. It takes 2 years, but put the time into yourself, and find the practices that align with you. So for me, it's journaling, meditating, gratitude journal every night. That's my routine, and that's what works for me. Find what works, and help it allow you to heal.
Absolutely. And I can't thank you enough, Christine, for the time we've spent, on the call today. Your life story and your experience have so much value for a lot of people. And I viscerally believe in life, we're here to live, to learn, and to contribute. And obviously, you've lived the life that is optimum for where you are right now. And you've learned all the lessons. And now you're just sending the elevator down to help others be, do, and have a happier existence. And that, in and of itself, is formidable. But we were talking innovation, success, and everything else. It would be remiss for me to not ask you this, Christina. Now, what's next? What is next? Any moonshots you're chasing, books you're writing, stages you can't wait to light up?
So we're working on an executive program that's going to be an offsite. It'll be a 4-day. Actually, I'm working on two. I'm working on one that's going to take place in Athens, which I'm really excited about. Actually, I'm working on three. One that's going to take place in Athens, one that's going to take place in Western Australia, and one that's going to take place on the east coast of Australia. So I'm really excited about those executive programs, because that is, not only is it, here's what the information that you don't know, it's also personal development, it's also sharing. So the biggest things when we run groups like this are the learnings that people can get from each other. If I'm facilitating something, I'll often say, if I've done my job properly, A, I've hardly spoken, and B, the gold's coming from the room. Okay. So we're running 3 executive programs, and I'm just tossing up whether I'm going to write a book called Humanivate, 7 Steps to Innovation within businesses. So that's just a working title at the moment. I'm not quite sure. I'm also maybe going to call it the Upward Spiral Innovation Strategy, because I love helping organizations embed innovation strategy into their businesses. Or probably do both. I have a body, mind, heart, soul map that I am turning into a book based on that 0.1%. Like, what is our 0.1% difference? How does that show out in our mind, body, heart, soul, that we can progress forward? And I'm also a big believer that quantum is actually going to prove a whole lot of things around spirituality, religion, etc. So I'm delving into that as well. So continuous learning, and then
Wow.
working with startups as well. I really love that.
Wow, 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 wow. And for the person that's listening to this, I don't know if you can feel that shift. Now, Christina, I can't thank you enough for the time that we have spent on the call today. I think this, like I mentioned, it's an absolute masterclass on moonshot thinking, resilience, and how to actually embrace failure as a tool for greatness. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for all of this.
Thank you. It's been remarkable speaking with you. And I can't wait to have you on my podcast when I get my act together and do that, dust the cobwebs off that early in the new year. So thank you.
Well, you already have my answer. Definitely, definitely. I can't wait to jump on and share with the people. But for those that are watching, and thank you so much for the invite. For those that are watching right now, here's the good news. You can do it too. I mean, seriously, you already got everything that you need to get started. All you just got to do is give yourself permission to try, fail, and try again. Just like Christina has showed us in her story and everything that she has done, even from a ripe age of 6, everything would have gone against her, but she still took that bow. And I think that's, one thing that a lot of people don't realize. You just got to go through it, finish it off, and then learn from that. So if you've loved this episode of the Online Prosperity Show, I encourage you to subscribe, because where else are you going to get inspiring content like this? And if you really like what we're doing, share this episode with somebody who's probably thinking, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to be able to do that, because I think today we just celebrated success, one failure at a time. Until next time, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye for now.